This isn't going to be anything overly complex or complicated. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with a lot of these concepts. We just wanted to kind of put something together that married the idea of integrating cover crops into intensive grazing, and how, some thoughts and ideas on how somebody who's interested in this could bring livestock into a primarily cropping operation, or maybe how they'd like to change something a little bit, or who knows what. I'm certainly not the authority on any of these things, but there's a lot of resources out there. If anyone has any questions following this, it's kind of designed to be intended to be kind of an introduction course, or my thoughts and some experiences on it. A little bit about myself. I'm in Northern Virginia on a farm about 350 acres or so that we're developing for primarily stocker cattle at this point. We had been in New Jersey prior to that, a year in Illinois working at the university, and prior to that managing a livestock and cropping operation that I developed up in New Jersey for a few years with a team of people. And prior to that, on a large ranch in central Nebraska, working for Kevin Fulton, kind of introducing me to a lot of these concepts and the intensive grazing side of it, certainly, but also what really piqued my interest was, how do you integrate livestock into cropping operations? And that's what really got me going on it. And so this was kind of a partnership between, I suppose, the Idea Farm Network, some folks at Prairie Rivers Network helped a lot. And, it's with there's a grant through an FLO grant that let us put this on, along with a bunch of other things. And anyway, it's a whole bunch of people that have come together to try and help folks who are interested in this sort of thing talk about it and go from there. So we'll go through this. I'll go through some ideas, some livestock concepts. Why are we talking about this stuff, and what we can do? And then we'll go through some photos along with those concepts. Then we'll end up getting into kind of a Q&A at the end. If anybody has any questions, or if I missed something or did something wrong, point it out, and hopefully I can learn something throughout this process as well. So, on the surface, why livestock, right? So a lot of our farms now are very specific. We're very oriented towards doing a few things. We've really narrowed down our production in a lot of ways, and we've lost a lot of livestock on the farms. And in some ways that's been beneficial in terms of production and things like that. But in a lot of ways, we've really kind of reduced our biodiversity, and that's simplified our crop rotations. So some of the basic ideas as to why we're looking at livestock, or what they can do for your farm, on the basic level, they do a really great job of cycling your crop residues faster. They give you a quicker turnaround on cover crop rotations, or on adopting cover crops potentially. There may be a way to justify a longer crop rotation if you're able to monetize that cover crop in the form of an animal product. You're going to see a lot of biological activity occur. There's a tremendous amount of biology in the rumen of a cow or sheep or in a pig. I mean, they're going to take that growing plant and return it in a form that's highly plant available to your soil. something that feeds your plants, your soils, your microbes, the whole kit and caboodle. Livestock really increases your harvest options, right? So if you've got an issue with a crop, if you've got an issue with a stand of wheat, if you've got a hay field that you'd like to learn, you'd like to start grazing, or if you've got just a phenomenal cover crop that you'd like to maybe run through some animals and put some gain on, or any number of things, you've got the potential to harvest these crops in an alternative manner. I think we touched on that cover crop impact on your soil, but anyway, that's kind of the premise as to why, the basic idea as to why we might want to be looking at introducing livestock. So why intensive grazing? Why not just take the livestock, fence a field, dump them in, and call it good? And I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with this. But the basic idea with intensive grazing is having a certain amount of management control on the animal and the land. So, there are a lot of different terms for this sort of thing: intensive grazing, mob grazing, rotational grazing, whatever you want to call these things. It's the whole thing at the end of the day is based on rest and rotation, so that the plants are able to replenish their root reserves. They can kind of, reestablish, fill back out, and then you can come back through and defoliate them with livestock again. So you've got that regrowth and shedding of the root system, which can help to build your soils faster, but that also helps to benefit your forage quality, right? So you're not just dumping them out there, leaving them, the cows are going to eat the best part of it first, and then they're going to have to eat the rest of whatever's out there. So the analogy I always heard was, go buy an ice cream cone from the grocery store or whatever, and that first day that cow's eating the ice cream, and the second day she's going to have to eat the wrapper. So think about it like that. This rapid rotation allows you to maintain that forage quality and keeps your plane of nutrition really high. You're balancing out the highs and the lows by forcing them to eat some of the low stuff during the day, but they're also getting a lot of high stuff during the day on these fast rotations. One of the kind of things that gets looked past a lot is the ability to monitor your feed supply. That's a really big deal. You can understand how much feed I've got ahead of us, ahead of the livestock, and you don't find yourself in a pinch. But really, I think one of the most important things from a crop farming perspective is you can manage the impact on your land. You can manage for mud. You can control those things. If you were to just fence it and turn the cattle out, and you've got you got water here and mineral there and feed across the way, you're going to end up with some trailing and mud, and you can have some problems. That's not to say that it doesn't work for some folks, but if we're looking at this from the perspective of grazing a cover crop in a field that we may want to rotate through some grain, we need to really manage that impact, and intensive grazing is a way to do that. So what other benefits can we get from cover crops in the rotation and livestock grazing those cover crops? Well, kind of on the basic level, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, of course, but we can see some pretty significantly improved water quality in the region. We can cut down on our inputs, on our fertilizer inputs. Maybe we don't have to bring in as much because now we've got longer legume rotations providing nitrogen for corn, but we're still able to get grazing crops off of that and things like that. we're also able to match our livestock production to our land capacity. And that's pretty significant. When you think about the confinement systems where you've got a lot of feed being imported into a very small area, you have the potential to have some severe nutrient problems. So not just nutrient concentration on your land, but you can have some runoff issues. You can have, what happens if that lagoon breaches or the slurry store overflows or whatever it is. You've got a lot of something to work with there. Of course, there's the benefit of stacking enterprises when we're looking at these grazing systems on cover crops or on crop residues. And adding these various enterprises in, if it's something that you're looking at, may provide some benefits for the next generation. Maybe you don't need to look at expanding your land base dramatically if you're able to intensify your production through another avenue. And finally, of course, you've got the ability to maybe hedge a little bit of a risk with grain prices and things like that. You've got your fingers in a couple other pies, so to speak. So if you're looking at this sort of thing, one thing, one of the few questions you probably ought to ask yourself is, what systems do I think might fit my operation? What's around me? What can I do? Is there a great stocker cattle market? Are there people that want to custom graze cattle with me? Is there a really great cow-calf auction at this time of year? Or is there a population that's looking for lamb or goat? Or do I have the potential to direct market something? Do I want to direct market something? What works for us? Do we have what resources do we have on the farm? Do we have good equipment? Do we have good land? Do we have things that we might think about putting in, or parts of the farm we might consider putting into permanent pasture? How will that impact it? Is that something we want to do? What's our year look like? What's our schedule? Do I need to shape this so it doesn't conflict with my cropping operation? That's a pretty big deal. So keep those things in mind. You want this to be a benefit and not a negative. It should be a net positive and increase, it should be a positive. It should be a net positive. So why pasture? Why cover crops? I think we touched on this a little bit with some of the concerns if you start getting into nutrient concentrations and things like that with confinement systems. One of the big points on this is it's pretty simple. If you're raising crops, there's a pretty good chance that cropland could be planted to some form of pasture or cover crop. And the opposite isn't always true. There's a lot of land in this country and in this world that really ought not to be in crop production, but can support livestock. So it's kind of nice to be on the other side of that, where you've got a choice as to what the land can support. There's also the fact that you've got a lot lower market entry cost and exit cost, frankly. So if you decide to get into a grazing system where you're utilizing a long rotation of grain and cover crops, your cost to get out of that is a lot lower than putting up a confinement barn or probably expanding the cropping operation if you're careful about how you get into livestock. We're just talking about fence, water systems, maybe a little bit of handling facility or some sort of handling system. It's quite a bit lower cost way to enter into this world. So as you're looking at these things and thinking about this stuff, just a few other questions that work well for you, regarding what the feed sources are and what you want to achieve at the end of the day. Just simply throwing livestock into the mix doesn't mean it's going to work. You've really got to think it through and make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you and that you've got a good feed source. Do you have a year-round feed source? Do you want to have a year-round feed source? Things like that. There's a lot to think about when it comes to this sort of thing, and I'd really encourage you to, if you're not doing it already, I'd really encourage you to, do your homework and talk to some people and be careful before you jump right into it. But I'd certainly encourage you to give it a shot. So with that, this is the excuse that I tend to hear most often for folks is that there's no fence anymore. And I'm really not a big fan of that. There's modern electric fencing is pretty cheap to build. It's pretty fast to build. It really doesn't require much, if any, equipment. It's exceptionally effective to animals that have been around it or you're willing to train to it. Cattle are very easy to control with really good electric fencing. My fencing here is just 2-strand high tensile fence around the property with small Pasture Pro posts every 30 to 40 feet. But it's hot. So, I use portable electric fencing. I move them at least once every 2 days, maybe as much as 2 to 3 times a day, depending. They're very easy to work with, and modern electric fencing, both portable and permanent, is extremely cost effective. In addition, waterline materials have really improved in the last 30 to 40 years, and the cost is down. It's not that expensive to run water lines above ground seasonally, or they can be put in for a pretty reasonable cost. So don't let that knock you down when it comes to installing those systems. And near the end of this, we'll start talking about some infrastructure stuff. So let's start with some kind of basic assumptions. I'm going to guess that, if someone's looking at getting livestock into their operation, grazing cover crops, intensive grazing, that sort of thing, there's probably a decent chance that, if they're in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, that they may not have livestock on the farm. Probably raising row crops. Maybe they're raising some small grains. A lot of pasture and hay and livestock has disappeared from the land in the last, 40, 50 years. So, I'm sure there are plenty of you that are listening that do have livestock and have more diverse rotations, but I'm just trying to look at this from the basic standpoint of, what type of operation could benefit the most from adding in cover crops and livestock. There's a lot of potential to change things up if you're just growing a few crops. And probably the most cost-effective way to do it is with high tensile fencing and grazing management. So with that being said, with row crop operation, kind of the traditional way of doing, if you're going to graze something, one of the easiest and cheapest things to do or to start with is corn stover and stalks and things like that. I know it's done a lot when you get further west. If most of you are in East Central Illinois, it's been a long time. I don't know that I could say that I've seen people running cattle on stalks in that area, but certainly in some of the drier areas, it's a pretty common way to do it and highly cost effective, significantly cheaper than feeding hay. It's usually something that you want to do for dry cows. Of course, it's, you're grazing corn stalks and stubble and things like that. One thing that I would encourage anyone to do that's looking at this is to still use some cross fencing. It's pretty easy to just look at the cornfield and say, I'm going to dump the cows out, and they're going to go for it. But you still ought to think about managing that nutritional plane so they get an even amount of feed or quality feed throughout that day or week, however it is. Even if you're just moving them once every 3 days to a week, that can really help with reducing things like acidosis and even out that binge that they go on when they get a fresh slice of corn stalks. So one way this works, if you have livestock, if you aren't pasturing stalks, it allows you to put up less hay potentially. You want to look at, can I graze that hay field a little longer, or maybe I can graze half the hay field and just put up half of it. You're going to want to have some supplements, some protein supplements to the cattle if you're going to do this, either in the form of high quality hay or baleage or lick tubs or whatever else. I'm sure there's a bunch of different byproducts that could be used for this sort of thing. But you got to be really careful with wet winters. That's a big deal. You don't want to see mud pit. So let's say that you want to do something, you want to have a living cover. That's great. Okay, let's not talk about, stubble grazing. Let's look at a living cover. Want to have something all winter green out there. Well, cereal rye, of course, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is an excellent choice. Very low cost option. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the benefits of the allelopathic properties of cereal rye that helps to prevent, seedling germination, weed seedling germination. It's cheap. It grows early. It grows fast. You're going to have a lot of biomass. It holds onto your nitrogen. And if you plant it early, you can potentially get fall grazing out of it. That's, of course, assuming that the corn crop is off in a reasonable period of time. You can certainly get spring grazing if you're not planning on, roller crimping or cutting that for feed or something like that. It pops so early in the spring and the biomass just comes on like crazy. It's really high quality up until about the boot stage. And then once you get past that, you drop off quite a bit with the protein. But it is an excellent low-cost feed. And I would imagine that if you were careful on your winter grazing on a nice stand of this stuff, you could still probably have a really good stand in the spring. But you've got to be mindful of that winter damage and mud. So kind of a different approach to that, or a different thing to maybe consider. I really like this mix of annual ryegrass and radish, oats, especially if your harvest is early enough. I think that could be a really good option. It's phenomenal in terms of forage quality. I know that, everything always gets late and it's hard to get the corn out of the field and stuff like that. I think that there's some tools like interseeders or maybe aerial applying, or I've even seen cover crop seed blown down, with high boy sprayers and any number of ways to do it to try and get that cover crop in there established before corn harvest or at corn harvest. As that's really I think the big impediment to a mix like this. If you don't get it in early enough, it probably doesn't pay to have the radish in there. I think the annual ryegrass usually comes through pretty good. I've planted it way later than I thought I should, and had a pretty decent stand in the spring. But I also like to add a little crimson clover in there, because I farm organically, and it's, it's, you can't do with too much nitrogen in an organic system, that's for sure. So into some photos here, get rid of something a little more interesting. So this is a mix of crimson clover, annual ryegrass, and tillage radish. This picture was taken in mid-December, and this was planted in mid-October. And we had 2 or 3 weeks of very, very dry weather. And we had planted this just barely below the surface, and it didn't germinate for 3 weeks, just sort of sat there. And it came up and really popped and did quite well. I was really happy with it. There's even some frost damage, I think, on those radishes in there. So those are some of the radishes I pulled up just to take a look at them. So those are 8-inch pliers next to it for scale. This is the same time, about mid-December. And of course, I couldn't get the taproot all the way out, but I know that it went quite a bit deeper. Now, those would typically winter kill, certainly in central Illinois or Indiana. I'm sure you guys get cold enough to kill those out. And I know that probably the crimson clover, depending on where you are, may not make it either. And certainly the oats wouldn't, but that ryegrass will make it through the year and really be nice. So here's some steers on that mix in mid-December there. We had a bale feeder behind them, or it'd be behind me taking the picture, that was providing high quality dry hay. That part of it's pretty important for if you're going to be out there grazing something like this, because there's a lot of protein in that, and it's pretty washy, it's very vegetative, and it's going to run through the animals really quick. So if you're trying to put gain on cattle, I'd suggest having some high quality dry matter there. You don't have to have a lot, but it does need to be high quality. So dry hay, I think it was kind of an alfalfa grass mix hay. We throw a bale into a bale wagon every few days and let them work on it. And they really didn't want to eat it. The green stuff on the ground was too palatable. Just another picture of that crop there that came in. It was pretty nice. I was happy with it. Again, this would be probably mid-December. We got one quick grazing with those steers off of it before we decided that it was time to kind of get them in. We had a barn that we put them in for the worst part of the winter. We were kind of limited on pasture at that property too. So here's a picture of that same planting. It's a different field, but they all got planted and managed the same way. This picture would have been in probably early May, if I had to guess. So the crimson clover did phenomenal. And this is after the first grazing through, because we had the cattle out on that on March 15th. Took one grazing off of it. I really liked it. And I think in the foreground there's a spot where I either had a mineral feeder sitting or maybe a bale feeder. But that crimson clover and annual ryegrass really went well. Now, I would say you got to keep an eye on the annual ryegrass, that it doesn't go to seed too much for you. Same with the clover. It depends on what you're going to do with your next crop, if you're going to do a cover crop or if you're going to go into a cash crop. But this is probably one of my favorite mixes to go into. So one of the great things about it, of course, is clean calving, right? So you're dropping those calves on a nice green growing forage, not in the mud, not in the manure. They're getting a good start to life. They don't have to struggle for it. And of course, mama's happy. She's out there grazing on it. So these, the dairy cattle had a barn through the winter, but these beef cattle I had outwintered and just fed whatever I had, dry hay to them. Not that great quality. I mean, it was reasonable, but nothing to write home about. And you can kind of see in the back that they had already grazed down an area, and we had moved them probably, I want to say this time I was moving them about once every 3 to 4 days, and we were still feeding with a movable bale feeder to keep of course, there's not a lot of biomass out there at this point, but we knew that things were just about to warm up and the grass had really started to grow. So we wanted to try to get ahead of it and put the cattle out there and give them a little bit of something. And they filled up on the hay or silage, and they'd eat this as we moved them periodically. It's really nice when you've got a big open field to chop it up into a bunch of little paddocks every few days and giving that cow a nice spot to find a calf. It makes finding them pretty easy and really makes it kind of more fun to go out and check for new calves. It's a little later in an adjacent field. I just kind of like that photo. So we were hitting the annual ryegrass pretty hard. This is the second time through. You can see that clover's really taken off. And I wanted to hit it real hard before we worked it under and went into whatever was coming next. I don't care about, it doesn't bother me if those calves kind of run around and get ahead a little bit. They can get if they want to eat a little bit of the good stuff, it's no big deal. But they certainly were ready to move, and yeah, it's a good way to manage down some residue from a cover crop. So we were talking about those tillage radishes. I wanted to throw this in here. This is a T-Raptor forage brassica, and I think they're still available. I know they were a few years back. It's a hybrid. It's a hybrid rape and I think turnip. It might be a radish, and this one happened to overwinter. We had planted them with some millet to make a nice summer grazing mix, and some on the edge of the field must not have been killed down, and we certainly had some interesting ones come through. So, be a little mindful on what's going to survive the winter and how you kill it out and things like that, because this guy probably would have gone to seed and we wouldn't have wanted that. So how about soybeans? Following soybeans. Well, traditionally we'd be looking at small grain, of course. Everyone's that corn, soybean, wheat rotation. It's a great way to have, a low-cost cover crop, get something green growing through the winter. And, I think rye could fit in that. If you didn't want to grow wheat, I think triticale could. I think you could go into, of course, annual ryegrass or something like that again. If you're going to graze it, I'd certainly put in some form of legume. This is assuming you're not trying to harvest for a grain. I would say that if you're going to do that, you want to get these in early. If you're going for a cover crop, this is speculation on my part, but I would try to maybe have a shorter season soybean on that or something. But I'm sure a crop advisor would know more than me. I don't. That's not really my wheelhouse. But certainly avoid, stay away from vetch from these mixes. I'm sure most of you are, aware of that. You don't want to mess around with that if you're trying to get into a milling market or anything, or save your own seed or anything like that. And hairy vetch can be toxic to cattle if you're grazing it. So be real careful. So of course wheat, right? That's the staple. That's the get something green growing, have a placeholder, or have something growing where you can get some value out of it. And it's a great fit right after soybeans. It gives you a reason to get some legumes out there. It gives you an opportunity to do it without a lot of soil disturbance. Great way to fix some nitrogen. But having those livestock incorporated into the system, some of the benefits, let's say you've got real bad winter survival. Maybe you think about harvesting that field with cattle, or what about doing an early grazing on it and then coming back through and harvesting it? There's a lot of wheat acres that are grazed when you get a little further west. I don't know why, with appropriate management through the winter, to avoid mud and crop damage, I don't know why that couldn't be done in a more eastern climate. I think you could get some early spring grazing and get them off of that real quick, or maybe, anyway, I think that's a pretty good, that could be done. So, why bother, right? Wheat's usually low return. That's kind of part of why it's out of the system for a lot of these larger row crop growers. And I think that that's been a real problem for soil health. I think we need to kind of value some of the benefits here that we get that are not quite as immediate to these longer rotations. If you've got wheat, maybe you're able to really get that legume into the stand late in the winter, and maybe you're able to cut down on a little bit of nitrogen input or something like that. You're doing a little bit of a different impact on that field by growing wheat. Your weeds have to adapt to a different cycle of harvest and tillage and planting. If we're growing just corn and soybeans and not having a small grain or a cover crop that has a different growth pattern, we've just got 2 summer annuals with corn and soybean. And that's really easy for these weeds to adapt to, certainly from an herbicide resistance perspective. But, I've seen photos of farms that have, even organic farms that have essentially had mechanical weed resistance, where they've had, certain weeds that come in, and based on the practices that they're using, they just have a hard time getting rid of them. So having those livestock in the mix, having a reason to, grow some forages or grow some small grains can really be a good opportunity. And, one of the things with wheat that I think people tend to forget is, it's what we primarily eat. So is there a way to get into a higher value market? Can that be beneficial? Can that help you extend your rotation and figure out how to get the wheat and the legumes and the livestock into the system? And kind of on that note, the way I think about wheat in a rotation is it's almost kind of like a placeholder option, right? So we're trying to get to that corn and the soybeans and the crops that do really well financially. And we've got wheat in there because we've got to do, let's assume, on an organic farm, you're trying to get some clover growing so that you can get your a certain amount of your nitrogen for that corn crop. Well, how are you going to do it without the wheat, right? So having that small grain in there to frost seed into is just an excellent opportunity. And if you're already doing that, maybe adding in, some alfalfa, or I know some folks mess around with adding in some things like orchard grass. That can be an opportunity to have that pasture planted and ready to go at wheat harvest, and maybe gives you a chance to try out some of these intensive grazing systems. Try getting some of the livestock into that, cycling those nutrients faster. If you're already growing the cover crop for your primary crop, you've already got your foot in the door. So what do you do though if you don't want to frost legumes into wheat, right? So, or if you can't, I mean, sometimes field conditions are not great through the winter, warm winters, wet winters, who knows what. There's a bunch of different reasons why you might not do it or you might not succeed in it. One thing that works real well is grazing that regrowth, graze what comes back, graze the weeds off. It's really important if you're going to do that you're observing the livestock closely. They're going to go through that field pretty quick. You want to probably be moving them really fast. Don't restrict their intake. That's a really good fit for cows, an animal that's maybe got a lower nutritional requirement. And while you're doing that, if you've got the capacity to spread down some small seed, if you're doing daily moves, maybe think about blowing down some turnip seed or some radish or something, and let those cattle work that in a little bit. If you're on a good tight paddock design, you're going to get a lot of hoof activity, and that's going to plant those small seeds real cheap for you. The guy I worked for in Nebraska, Kevin Fulton, he had a story about harvesting a bumper crop of wheat and doing exactly this, and coming back and harvesting that with the cattle, those turnips that came up in December. And he looked at it and said, look, I've got 3 harvests a year. That really helps with the economics of wheat. You're getting 2 grazings off of it. And the second one is certainly going to be very high quality. That really makes that look competitive. So winter survival, that can be a big problem, right? So if you've got a bad stand of frost-seeded legumes into that wheat or into whatever it is, if your cover crop's not coming through the way you want it to, sometimes it's best to think about it and say, I might want to start over. If you're going to do this for the soil benefits, it's probably best not to stick with a bad stand if you think you'd be better off getting rid of it and starting over. I mean, you want to get the end result you're looking for. So one mix that works real great in the spring that you can integrate livestock into pretty easy, or at least that I've had good luck with, is an oat pea spring barley mix. It can go in early. It can handle some cold. I know there are some places that peas don't really like it a whole lot, but it's worked well for me, and I think that you could probably change that out, that maybe you could change the peas out with something else. Maybe a lentil would work. I'm not really sure, but I'll tell you what, field peas are, in my opinion, an excellent forage choice. Very palatable to the livestock, but also kind of palatable to the soil, if that makes sense. It really mellows the ground out. It's easy for the organisms to digest, and brings in some good diversity. So, doing something like that, if your cover crop doesn't overwinter well, now you're going to have to go back into probably a summer cover or whatever your following crop is. So you're kind of committing to planting 2 crops if you do turn under a perennial clover stand. But, it's a good time to maybe experiment with some of those cocktail mixes, 4, 5, 8 species, or maybe you haven't had a chance to work with, sorghum Sudan grass or something like that. But while that winter survival may be a negative up front, you've got a different opportunity to do something something new. So a little photo of some spring planted cover crops there. We've got some oats, peas, and spring barley, and that's a mature bull. He's a pretty small frame bull, but he's awfully deep into it, and that was just an excellent cover crop. I was very happy with it, and in my opinion, that was a fairly poor field from an agronomic perspective. So you can see, before grazing on the left, after grazing on the right, we were kind of understocked with cattle at that property, but it worked out pretty well. It was a great cover crop at the end of the day. I was really happy with it. We had some excellent regrowth on it. On the regrowth, the peas really took off. That's what I remember most. The first grazing was mostly oats and spring barley, and then the second, what came up after that was really the peas really took off and just covered everything. I think that could make some phenomenal baleage if you needed to put up stored feed. I don't know how that would impact the regrowth on it, but I think if you took a cut early enough, you could probably graze it, or maybe graze it and take a cut, or any combination therein. It was just really an excellent cover crop. So another alternative that I suppose you could do with something like this, let's say you take a grazing off of it and it comes back like crazy. You could potentially combine something like that, I suppose, and harvest a seed mix. I'm no expert with running a combine, but I know there were a lot of peas in there, and now that might impact what you would follow that cover crop up with. But that's just kind of a thought I figured I'd throw out there. All right, so what about grazing other cover crops? After your wheat harvest, what could be planted? What could you do, right? So depending on when you harvest, sorghum Sudan grass, I think, is a real good option. That's just a phenomenal grazing crop. Millet, cowpeas, sun hemp, buckwheat, sunflowers, maybe some lentils, mung beans. You could mix in some rapes, flax. When you're doing these cocktail mixes in the summer, whether for grazing or just for a good cover crop, you can get away with throwing in some things that you normally wouldn't grow. You can throw some brassicas in there if you want to. I would say that from what I've observed and what I've been told, that if you're going to try to plant brassicas in the summer, in particular like turnips and radishes and things like that, you want to do it after the summer solstice. Otherwise they tend to bolt. I don't know if that's the cutoff point, but that's what I've been told, and I've stuck to it, and it seems to work. I don't know if that holds true for things like T-Raptor, those forage brassicas. That I think we planted that earlier. Anyway. All right, so grazing some of these mixes and some of these higher yielding cover crops. This would be a stand of, I believe it was just Sudan grass. We didn't mix in anything. And we had followed that annual ryegrass crimson clover field with this. And this is at about 45 days following planting, maybe 50. And we just had an excellent field of Sudan grass there. You want to, if you're going to graze this stuff with livestock, there's some cautions and considerations here. So you need to let it wait till it gets about 18 to 24 inches in height, because there's a compound called prussic acid, and it can convert into a cyanide-like compound if cattle eat it. The same holds true for the regrowth of this crop, and that's any sorghum. So that's, I suppose, grain sorghum, probably sorghum Sudan grass, forage sorghum, anything like that. You want to let it get up at least 18 inches, probably 2 feet before you start to graze it. If you want to get second grazing out of it, you've got to move them off of it. You've got, not just for their own safety, but if they take that plant down all the way to the dirt, they'll kill it. It holds a lot of its energy reserves in the bottom part of the plant. And the same holds true if you cut this for silage. You want to try to cut it as tall as possible. You'll get much faster regrowth. You will get, when you do graze it tall or mow it tall, you do get a really excellent root tillering action that you don't get if you simply incorporate the cover crop at this height. So it needs that stimulus to regrow to give you all the full benefit of it as a cover crop. So I like to start grazing it just about as quick as I can because it's so good. And I move them, depending on what the field is and what the animals are, I move them fast. This is a group of cows. Those are mature cows on the left standing in it. So it's probably a little taller than I would have liked to be, at right now, but it was getting ahead of me. So we were just trying to get on it as quick as we could. One other consideration if you're grazing this stuff is frost. That can release prussic acid. So you want to wait at least a couple of weeks after a frost if it's still standing in the fall. And nitrates can be a concern. That's usually a concern on highly fertilized conventional fields, especially following a drought. When you get if you get a bunch of rain right after a period of extreme or significant drought stress on the plant, it can accumulate a lot of nitrates, and that can cause health issues. You can test for nitrates. As Will and I found out last year, you can't test for prussic acid. So that actually dissipates very quickly after cutting or grazing or anything like that, that comes out of the plant. So if you're concerned on height or stress or something like that, mowing it and then grazing it can work. There's a lot of different ways to manage this stuff, but you want to just think about it, So when it gets tall, what do you do, right? So you've got this jungle, you've got a forest out there. And I've had some of these plantings just go crazy. This is a little trick that I learned from Kevin in Nebraska there. He taught me, before you do anything, before you string your poly fence, run the quad through it, knock it down. It's like a warning track for baseball. So in this field, the cattle have just been turned into a paddock on the left of the field, and on the right of the field is going to be the next day's paddock. So the cattle are out there grazing, moving through it, and they come through that Sudan grass there, and they stick their head through, and they can see that there's an opening and then there's a wire. If you try to string that through and you don't knock the crop down, the cattle are going to walk through that crop. They're going to hit the wire. It's going to scare them because they didn't know that there was a wire there, and something's going to blow through it. Or they're just going to be excited and running and not realize there's an end to the paddock, and they blow through the wire. So if you're going to do this, run a quad or you know, an ATV or pickup truck or whatever you have, run it back and forth once or twice, knock the crop down, then put your fence up. It'll really save you a lot of headaches and help you ration out the feed supply a lot better. With this photo, this was my worst field agronomically. So the year prior couldn't support a even marginal mix of oats and peas. It was really bad, and the soil tests were still pretty bad, but it could support. The Sudan grass handled that and put up a tremendous amount of biomass. So, and we grazed it down pretty hard. That was a great way for us to kind of get some impact and get a good cover crop stand on that field and try and get it back from what it was. So this just kind of showing a little bit about the height of the crop. This is some pretty good stuff. It's right about the height that I like it, I suppose. And you can see how well it can crimp down. That's my mineral feeder there. You know, I try to set everything up to be mobile so that we can move through these fields real quick. But anyway, that's just a good shot of the crop. So there's a couple mature cattle in that field grazing. One right there in the middle. There's a Jersey, I guess she was a Jersey cross dairy cow. And you can see kind of on the left side of the picture there, we were really making them take it down. We knew that it was getting late. We wanted them to hit it hard, and we didn't want to have to deal with all that biomass with our next crop or cover crop. So, and those cows, that was, they weren't being milked. They had calves on them, and this was more than enough in terms of feed quality for them. So, you know, you can make cows really take this stuff down. You can even potentially use it for winter feed if you mix a legume in there, you know, something like I've heard people talk about maybe using like an arrowleaf clover or something like that, and letting it, you know, planting it kind of late, maybe looking to plant it in, say, early August, and letting that get mature. You know, you don't want it to be so mature that it's thrown its flower and seed head up, if you can help it. But you want to get some biomass, and then it's going to get a frost on it. It's going to kill it. Wait a couple of weeks, and you can strip graze through that. And that's a really great standing feed source for especially dry cows. Just absolutely excellent. I'd still advise you got to be kind of careful about how you manage that field and keep an eye on the weather conditions. But that, in my mind, is kind of a good alternative way to feed cattle on a cover crop through the winter. This is just another shot. This was a forage soybean, and we bought about 2,000 pounds of VNS sorghum Sudan grass that the seed dealer was just trying to get rid of. It was a couple of years old, and we planted that at about 25 pounds and just had, I mean, we didn't graze this. This was just a cover crop, but I sure wish we could have. It was phenomenal. So mud, right? This is a big concern. This is something you got to keep an eye on. And certainly if you guys are in central Illinois or Indiana, in those areas, flat, low-lying, you guys have, you know, there's not a lot of places for the water to go. So you don't want to impact your following crop. That's a big deal. And that's something that it's way easier to cause a problem than it is to not cause a problem. So with any of this grazing, with intensive grazing, you've got to keep the cattle moving. Okay, that's a critical part. You've got to keep the cattle moving. You want to have a lot of material under their feet. and you want to get them on the thickest fields you have if it's going to be wet. Ideally the ground's frozen, and you don't have all the hoof traffic, you don't have the mud, they're not tearing things up, but that's not always the case. So, be mindful of what the fields are like. Don't overstock, right? So stick to a reasonable number. And a sod-based pasture in the winter is better than a bunch grass or a bunch grass pasture. Okay, so your cover crops are going to be highly susceptible to mud problems, so you got to keep an eye out for that. Some alternatives to just managing your grazing really closely have to do with sacrifice areas. That's kind of been the go-to, right? So pick a feed spot and do that. Nobody really likes feeding in that, and you're still going to have access issues. You have water there. There's loads of reasons why people don't like doing it. I just don't. I don't like having to feed in that, and I know the animals don't really care for it. So one thing I've seen folks do and talk to a few people about is using wood chips to build a pad. They can be had from tree companies really for free usually. And they'll just drop them off, build a nice thick pad on a high spot on the farm, use that as a feeding area. If you have to, maybe focus on stockpiling some forages and grazing that. But if you get into a wet spell where the ground isn't frozen, having a place where you can pull them off and feed them for a little bit is going to really help with your following crop. So when you're doing this stuff, I know everyone thinks about where they're going to feed, but give the cattle a spot to lay down. That'll really help keep them out of the mud, keep them out of the manure. If they can stay clean, it doesn't take as much. It doesn't take as many calories if they're clean to keep their body temperature up. So barns, right? Barns and shelters, that's kind of the go-to. You can't graze in the winter because, all right, let's put them in a barn. Well, I don't have a problem with using barns if you're in a wet area, if you've got access to one. I mean, they can be expensive to build, certainly. There are some low-cost options out there if you've got access to it. I don't know how the grant systems work or anything like that. But hoop barns are phenomenal. If there's a way to get something in, if you need a structure on the farm for something during the summer, maybe a hoop barn that you can use in the winter during wet periods, maybe that can make more sense. It also lets you compost the bedding and the manure under cover, keep all those nutrients under control. That's a big deal. That's really makes some good stuff. I'd say if you're going to have a barn or a shelter, you just need to be ready, right? So, Mother Nature doesn't come knocking and say, hey, by the way, next week, you guys are going to get, I know it's been frozen, but it's going to be 50 degrees and you're going to get 3 inches of rain. No, it just happens. So if you know that field you're grazing is going to be a high dollar corn crop next year, it's worth your while to be ready to get them out of there if you need to, and to understand what that decision-making process is. So what percentage of it, where do I see the damage? What am I willing to put up with? Where's my, what do I consider to be excessive? So that's kind of the last few shelter thoughts I got, and then we'll get into some photos and a little bit of infrastructure. When I'm back in East Central Illinois, I see these old cattle feeding barns all over the place. I know that was before we had good temporary fencing and a lot of intensive grazing, but there's a reason why they're there, and I don't see them, out in Nebraska and the Dakotas, not old ones at least. I know that a lot of confinement feeding is picking up out there, but historically, you didn't see that. They were all outwintered, and it wasn't a problem, and that's because they've got drier winters. But when you move further east, it's super common to see brand new beef barns being built, in Pennsylvania, New York, even around where I'm at here in Virginia. Not to say that people don't outwinter out east, but we're pretty wet in the winter too. If I guess along those lines, if there's something on a property, maybe there's a property you lease, or maybe a barn or a building that you have that you could move some things around or put a lean-to on the side. I got a concrete pad out in the field or maybe just a compacted stone pad that you can put some panels around or whatever, and make a place that's more pleasant to feed in, or able to kind of control your nutrients, but also preserve that field. That's a big deal. So if you're going to be carrying cattle through the winter, you got to think about this before winter hits. So a little bit of my experience with mud, right? So this was in December. I had been moving these feeders about twice a week. So that was a pasture. And it took a while to get it back. But, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is a problem. You've got to be real careful. Now, where we had stockpiled and where we were meeting those feed demands with stockpiled pasture and moving them quick, this doesn't happen. So that's where that stockpile and management can really help with your mud control. But when you run out of stockpiled pasture, you got to have somewhere to put them, or if you get into that wet spell. So an alternative to that, something like this, right? There's not a lot of growth out there, and I still had a sacrifice area that I was feeding the cattle in. But these cattle were on an annual ryegrass, and I believe there was crimson clover and probably oats and tillage radish in there, although it got planted awfully late, and we didn't have a lot of growth. So they were still getting hay, getting dry hay, but I would turn these cattle out into this field. It was adjacent. I'd give them strips of it and move them through the field as they grazed it down. And this was sometime in January. But what I would do is I'd keep an eye on what the forecast was really closely, check it a couple times a day. And if I knew that it was going to get down into the upper 20s and the ground was going to be firm on top, I'd let them out in the morning. And if I knew that it was going to be around 32, 33 as a high during the day, maybe around lunchtime, I'd go out there and I'd push them back in. And I was trying to push it. I wanted to see what the limit was. Where was I going to get the most impact from this? Where was I going to avoid the mud? So this is the morning. Took a morning picture here. These cows coming out. You can see there's some mud on them from the sacrifice pad, but they're not digging in. They're standing on top. That top layer of the ground's frozen. This was in New Jersey. We had some awfully warm winters, awfully wet. Seemed like the ground was never really frozen for very long. And here's middle of that day, right? So there's that hoof print right in front of me. So I'm seeing the top bit of that field slick off, and I've got to be careful now. So this is on my way out to push the cattle back into their sacrifice area. I was probably, 30 minutes too late because the sun came out. So, is it cloudy? Is it cold? Is it sunny? I mean, all these things you can manage right on the edge with even a field that doesn't have a lot of biomass, if you're going to manage it really close, and if you're willing to put that time in. So here's another picture of that field. You can see my boot mark in there. You can see we're starting to do a little bit of damage there. So again, you've got to be careful. And I pushed them back out and fed them. You know, maybe I fed them, maybe they were just eating hay the rest of that day. It might have been 2 or 3 days, it might have been a week, but we had to be set up because we weren't prepared to sacrifice these fields for the cattle to get what amounted to very little. This is that same field following the following spring. So I'm not saying that we managed it as well as we could have. I'm not saying that that forage looks as good as it should, but you know, it worked for us, and we had a nice crop of annual ryegrass come through, and those cattle were pretty happy with it. So if you're keeping an eye on it and managing it close, you can get through a winter even with some pretty light stuff if you're willing to have those sacrifice areas and those standoff pads to preserve your fields. You know, you want to still apply those nutrients appropriately where they're needed, but don't be afraid to feed them if you need to. So, you know, you're going to get mud other times too, right? So same thing, don't be afraid to move them. Don't be afraid to say, all right, we're going to get a deluge next week. Where are we going to stick them? What are we going to do? Or maybe you just move them faster. That's kind of what I do during the year. I just tend to go out and move them. If it's raining like crazy, I put my rain gear on and I go out to them, and I might be moving them 3 or 4 times that day, where I'd normally move them, you know, every other day, or maybe it's twice a day when I'd usually move them once a day. So you got to get out there before it gets torn up. It's not the first hoof that causes the mud. It's the 10th and the 20th and the 30th. You know, you can stand to have a hoof print in a few places and not have mud, but there seems to be kind of a tipping point with stock density and time, where once you hit that point, it turns into just a mud hole. So keep an eye on it, be ready to move them. Here's an example of something I did during the summer. This was a field of millet, and I think it was just Japanese millet. I don't think it had anything under it. In the foreground there, we had 8 inches of rain over the course of about 26 hours. Most of it falling between, I think it fell between about 11 and 3 p.m. And these cattle were in this paddock. It was not a lot of cattle. It was fairly low stock density just because we didn't have a whole lot of head on this property. But, you know, they were all steers, and it was a pretty good crop. This is a couple weeks after that rain. I moved them right after the rain, but they tore it up. I mean, and when we came to work that field in the spring, or in the fall, and put in something else, put in another cover crop, that was like adobe bricks. I mean, it was so hard where they had churned it up. So, you know, keep an eye on it. You've got to, if you're going to do this, if you're going to tighten up stock density, if you're going to mob graze cover crops, you have got to manage for these other things. Here's another shot of that. You can see the crop on the right looking pretty good. Crop on the left, not so hot. All happened in a day, less than a day. So fencing, right? So we'll hit on some infrastructure, and I think then we'll get into, you know, we have time for some Q&A stuff, and if you guys have any questions. You know, when it comes to fencing, I like to try to keep the costs down. You know, it doesn't take a lot to build good fences, but if you're going to invest in anything, buy the biggest fence charger you can. They're quite a bit cheaper than they used to be. I was shopping around this last year and ended up buying a 28 joule charger because I was surprised how cheap it was. And, you know, it's a pretty important piece of your farming equipment, right? If you're going to do this stuff, you need to have good fences. You've got to be able to manage the cattle. You're going to hook your temporary fences onto your permanent fences. and that's how you electrify them. So buy something decent. I like good temporary reels. I like poly braid over poly twine, and I really hate poly tape. I think that's just a way to get ice and get it blown down by wind. The poly braid is phenomenal. You know, make it easy to put up more temporary fence and move temporary fence. If you can stay away from interior permanent fencing and stick with temporary fencing in the long run, you know, it doesn't mean you don't put in some dividing fences, but generally speaking, the rule of thumb is don't put in any interior fences for the first year or two. You know, figure out what works for you, how you want to divide these fields. If you want to do something different, and I've done it before where I build too much permanent fence and you rip something out because, you know, you thought it was going to work and it didn't. So buy a good temporary fence, get comfortable using it. You know, you can run it out from a quad and step the posts in real fast. It works real well. Here's a little picture of my current setup. It's in the garage, so when I walk out the door every morning, I can look over there and I can see and make sure that fence is hot. That makes managing it a lot easier. I don't have to wonder, do I have decent voltage on the fence or do I have a short? This little setup from Gallagher there, you know, there's a display. You can put it in the house. You can hook it up to Wi-Fi if you wanted to. Some of these can, you know, send you alerts on your phone if you've got a problem. There's a lot of really interesting technology in these modern electric fence chargers that can make your management easier. You know, it's going to tell you if there's an issue. With that, if you're going to install these things, put in the biggest ground field you can, you know, put in your sensor wires, you know, follow the instruction manual, and you'll have a lot better result. A lot of these newer chargers also can be controlled by remotes, or even there's a couple that you can download an app and control them on your phone. I know StayFix, TrueTest, Gallagher, even Kincove has a private brand of their chargers, and you can control them with remotes. If you don't have one of these and you get it, you think you've just died and went to heaven. It changes the way you work with the fence. You turn it on or off from the field. You know, of course, it's got a fault finder on it, but as far as I'm concerned, I won't buy a fence charger again that doesn't have the ability to be controlled remotely. It really makes things easy. So this is some fence on the current property. I've got, you know, don't mind all the weeds. We've got some pretty crazy invasive species issues out here in Virginia. But, you know, telephone pole corners with a dead man in the bottom, a dead man at the top, 2 strands of high tensile pulling on it with, you know, Gallagher bullnose insulators. I like the porcelain bullnose insulators. I like Gallagher's kind of ratcheting circular tensioners. I don't care for the type where you have to cut the wire, but anything works. I'm kind of particular about fences, but I love telephone poles for corner posts. If you set them right, you don't necessarily need a brace, and you can usually call up the utility company and find out where they take their used ones, and you can buy those. Sometimes if they're broken, they'll just give them to you, but or you find them at auction. I'm sure all of you can get these things. They make great corners. So there's a shot of just what my fence looks like right now. 2 strands, high tensile, Pasture Pro posts. This is leading up to a gate, so some of the posts and droppers are on a little bit closer spacing, but generally 30 to 40 feet in between works pretty good for me. It doesn't have to be crazy. You just need to have animals that respect it. Of course, it'll be different if you're running sheep or if you're running, you know, goats or pigs or something like that. But, you know, anything, it's cheap and fast to put up. I fenced this whole place totally by myself over the winter. It took about, I wasn't going super fast, but 6 weeks maybe. It's pretty easy to put up. A little shot of how I like to subdivide fields with temporary fence, drive a T-post in. The reel that's behind the water tank there, that's actually running another 1,000 feet to the left, and that's cutting a field in half. And I was just using my other reels to run up to it and make the subdivisions. So with your paddock design, just some things to think about. I think we've touched on this, is be very mindful of weather and moisture. You've got to move them quick when it gets wet. If you're gonna try to do some high stock density stuff with this, and I'd encourage you to try to keep your paddock square, okay? And that really helps with cattle trailing and helps with a much more even grazing pattern. Don't start by making the paddock super small, maybe figure out what's out there for a forage. If you know what your animals weigh and about what they're going to eat, maybe figure, all right, I'm going to make it twice what they need for a day. And then you want to tighten it up from there and change things, go for it. You've got to monitor both the cattle and the pasture. You've got to ensure that the cattle or the livestock, that their intake is being met. You don't want to sacrifice one for the other. So, learn what it looks like when an animal's hungry. Learn what it looks like when they're empty or full. It's pretty simple. If you've been around livestock for a little bit, you'll figure it out. They're fat and full and laying down, ruminating. You don't want to force them to eat everything. We want to see some return to the soil. So someone's a lot smarter than me one time told me, there's no such thing as overgrazing, just under resting. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that, I guess. But for the most part, that holds pretty true. Certainly with perennial pastures, you can hit things pretty hard as long as it's had a time ahead of it to recover and behind it to recover. And the same holds pretty true for a lot of cover crops. Unless you take them down super, super hard, you're going to get some regrowth, So remember that rest period is critically important, especially on anything that's perennial, that you're not trying to kill. If you're trying to use these livestock to knock down your residue and you really, you want to hit it hard, go for it. Just know that if you're running steers doing something like that, or heifers, you're probably going to see a drop in gain. That's really fit best for cows. If you're cows are kind of like the vacuum cleaner, right? They're a very versatile tool on a farm. They can clean up a lot of fields. One thing that I know people talk about is, wasting feed out there, wasting grass. You're moving them too fast. You're not grazing enough of it. That's, I don't really care for that line of thinking there. I get it if you're in a drought scenario and or through the winter, you've got to ration your feed, but there's no such thing as wasted feed in these systems, right? So and I'm sure all of you get that with using cover crops and things of that nature. Anything that goes on the ground that we trample in is going to go back into the system. It's going to cycle nutrients and will help. Higher residues will help your animal performance at the end of the day. That's not to say that you want to have, thick Kentucky 31 fescue, full of seed heads, but you want to, you don't want to make them eat everything. Let them trample some, let them eat some, let some stay up. That's kind of the rule of thirds. If you can get a third, a third, a third, you're going to do pretty good. So, of course, kind of the last thing with infrastructure here is your water systems. Do you have a well around? That's the easiest thing, in my opinion, is hooking into a pressure system. HDPE pipe, super cheap compared to back in the day when they had to run steel pipe for this stuff. You can calculate, there's a lot of ways. If you're going to do this, I'd encourage you to get online and do a little bit of research and calculate what you need, because you will have friction loss and pressure drop and things like that. Know how high you're going up a hill or down a hill. Ponds can work, there's some tricks to watering out of ponds. Put a hot line a couple feet into the pond on temporary posts or T-posts, just so the cattle can't stand in it. And that can work pretty well. You can also pump from ponds. There's a lot of interesting solar pumping systems put out there. They can be expensive, but you can also use things like jet pumps and shallow well pumps. And right now at this place, I'm running cattle seasonally. So we've got, I just ran some above ground water lines. I'll trench them in here when I get some time, but for now that works for me until, the cattle go in the fall. But you can buy, if you're going to buy bulk, you can keep your costs down. So I had some really good stuff come in, about 70 cents a foot delivered. And, if you were to buy more, you could probably get it cheaper. So just kind of some shots of what it looks like when you're running this stuff. That's the sidewall of 200 PSI. I have a piece that we drive our cars over every day in the driveway, actually, because I haven't buried it there yet. And it hasn't crashed yet. So, these are the tools you want if you're going to work with it. The pipe cutter, you buy it at the Home Depot, propane torch, an impact driver, and some hose clamps. The spear fittings, you can buy them at almost any plumbing supply store. I purchased a lot online this go round, just so I had everything on hand when it was time to go. Really simple to work with. When you do go to bury, just some little tips and tricks if you're doing a bunch of this. If you're going to put in a bunch of hydrants, this is a trick someone taught me with using a bucket. You cut the bottom out, cut the side out like that, a third of the side, or that little slot down the side, and use that as your French drain. Fill that half up with gravel, put your hydrant in, put the rest on top, and put the bag of stone on top of that to keep the dirt out. So you're not, you don't have to bring a loader into the field with a bucket of gravel. We went to Home Depot and bought, 20 bags of whatever was on sale. And we just carry those bags out in the field on a quad or whatever and get these things done like that. Save a lot of money and a lot of gravel. Yep, just trenching them in, putting them in, pictures like that. I really like these big trenchers for that work, as long as you don't have a lot of stone. But you do it any way you want. Do it with an excavator, do it with a backhoe. I've seen people rip them in with dozers and with big tractors too. I'm sure that could be done. So this is a float setup that I like to use when I'm moving cattle, moving water tanks. This is a Job valve, a full flow valve made by Job. And it can handle anything from like 5 PSI up to 200 PSI. And it's a non-restricting valve. If you're going to get into intensive grazing and using small stock tanks, I would encourage you to get a good float valve and get a setup that works well, because that can be really restrictive. So this is a thing that Kevin Fulton taught me to do. Heavy piece of steel, weld a couple pieces of pipe to it, put your valve on it, and about a 5-foot length garden hose, and you're set up to move your float valves really easily through the pastures. So kind of a few ending notes here, just wanted to think outside the box a little bit, right? So think about different cover crops. How can you do this? What can meet a feed, a high quality feed and be a good cover crop? What can work in a system? If you've got a bad stand of frost seeded legumes that you didn't terminate, or that you wanted to stick with, maybe think about drilling some oats in there and getting some good fall grazing off of that. Is there a way that you can do some interseeding in standing corn? That I see that as a huge potential benefit to getting livestock into this stuff. If you can get that corn off and then have a cover crop there to start grazing, that's phenomenal. And figure out what the value is if you are going to do kind of a fallow cover crop grazing year or 2 or 3. Does it make sense? Can you monetize it? Are those livestock going to contribute enough financially for you to make it work? The cattle or the livestock should be able to help you make it through those years. It should get some cash flow in while you're waiting for that soil benefit from the cover crop and from the grazing. So, I know we talked a lot about cattle. We didn't touch really on sheep or anything like that. I think that's mostly because people think about, when you're looking at impact per acre and on a broad scale, cattle kind of fit that really well. But, don't forget swine or small ruminants. And I thoroughly enjoy raising pigs on pasture and sows and things like that. It's certainly really big in the UK. And if you get on YouTube and Google, or look up like UK pastured swine or something to that effect, you'll find some really interesting videos of very large sow units that are all run on pasture. These systems can be done on outside, they can be done on pasture. It just takes some creativity and a little bit of, certainly with the pigs, some marketing. That's not going to be a commodity product probably here in the US, but pigs are great at running down cover crops that maybe you wouldn't plant otherwise, or even crops that get wind damage or blown down. So I figured I'd throw a couple photos in of some sows and some gilts, and electric fencing works great on them. You just got to train it, train the pigs to it and give it a shot. If you've got an opportunity to try to raise pastured pork, I mean, there's no better pork than pastured. I'll tell you that. So this is a little cover crop of a small field, kind of an experiment I was doing on some milo and rape. There was a lot of research in the, I want to say from about 1900 to 1930 on pasturing swine on crops, and rape always came up as the #1 crop to use for pastured swine. And that was probably kind of a set stock thing where they just turned them out. But I figured milo, a fast growing grain crop, kind of low to the ground, maybe turn them in when it's still like, doughy, it's not hard grain yet, and let them get a lot of protein from that rape underneath. I didn't necessarily count on all the foxtail, but this worked pretty good until the deer kind of got wind of all that milo standing there. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, that they were the pigs didn't have a whole lot of grain left to eat. So this is in just the corner of that little field there. That was the before and after, right? So this is what they did to that. They took it down like you wouldn't believe. And anyway, that was pretty good. And I've done some things with pigs on grazing down corn in the winter. That can be done. They'll run on turnips. You can do a lot of things with pigs that are pretty interesting. So, don't discount pastured swine. So with that kind of wraps it all up. We've got some contact info here. If there's anything that I can help you guys with or whatever in the future, or anything. There's the info for the Idea Farm Network who helped us put this on, and of course the folks at the Prairie Rivers Network that were really helpful in putting this all together too. Yeah. So with that, let me see if I can get out of this. And I don't know if you guys would like, if you have any questions or if there's anything I can do.
Hey, Taylor.
Yeah.
Hey, back to watering systems. Last year we went to those full flow floats and kind of got away from the big stock tanks. We have just a 50-gallon Rubbermaid tote with those full flow floats, and then we'll run about 300 foot of 3/4 inch garden hose up to a hydrant, and we were able to keep everybody fully hydrated all through summer. I think we had close to 60 or 70 stocker cattle on one and 50 cow-calf pairs on another.
Yeah, having that flow makes a big difference. Well, Will or anybody else, I don't know if there's anything else you guys would like to touch on or visit, or I don't know. Do you guys have the ability to mute or unmute your microphones, I think? Or maybe I think there's a Q&A thing. You can pull that up if you want.
Kind of so right here in Illinois, Taylor, there could end up being quite a few acres of prevent plant for corn. What's it look like if someone was to come in, put in a summer grazing cover crop, and then what's the market potential for bringing in some stalkers, backgrounding them through the winter or through the summer, and selling them into a feedlot this winter?
Well, that's a pretty good question. If you're going to do something like that, I would suggest trying to get into maybe a little bit of a specialty market. Not necessarily saying that you'd need to go like grass-fed or organic or anything like that, but there are a lot of brands out there that would be interested in buying cattle that are ready to go, or there's all natural beef companies. I don't know offhand exactly who's buying stuff right now, but if you can keep your costs down and if you can look at it as being a good cover crop year, I think that has a lot of potential. Certainly better than getting nothing out of it. But the cattle markets, if you're just looking at conventional pricing, gosh, I don't, the volatility in that scares the hell out of me. I'd really encourage anyone to try to get into something where you can get maybe not a guaranteed purchase, but something like that where a beef company will give you an idea of what they're willing to pay you for it on the back end.
Are there any options for custom grazing?
Yeah, so there certainly are in my neck of the woods. I think that in the Midwest, I think that's going to probably get more popular through the Midwest here in the near future. But I know some dairy guys will contract out their heifer grazing. That can be a source for custom grazing. You know, if they're looking for someone to pasture raise their heifers. If you can get in with someone that's got cattle or a grass-fed beef company that's kind of more regional or local, they may be interested in putting cattle on. I'm working with a company out here that is mostly on the East Coast, but they purchase some from the Midwest, and they bring them out here on occasion, and that's pretty much based on a custom grazing thing, you know, where they work with growers that they're familiar with, that they're comfortable, that can put weight on cattle, and they'll pay you based on that. So the key with custom grazing, if you're trying to get cattle in and get them out, is it tends to really be a relationship business. The people have got to be comfortable with you, that you're going to take care of the animals, that you're set up to handle it. And because it can go bad just as well as it can go good, you know. And then if you're going to try to go down that road of finding someone to send you cattle to custom graze, you've really got to look at it from a how am I getting paid perspective. So some places will want to pay you for the entire season, or they'll want to pay you all on the back end. Some will want to pay you based on weight gain, or they may pay you based on, head per day. So there are a lot of different equations where this can work out, and it's pretty important to know what you're willing to do, you know, financially. What's your cost, and where do you feel comfortable? But I'm sure some custom grazing could be found in that neck of the woods. I would probably start with grass-fed beef companies, you know, make a couple phone calls. Or if you know people in that world that maybe be short on pasture, maybe talk to them. Hey, do you know anyone that's looking for some summer pasture, or are you looking for some summer pasture? Something like that. That's kind of the best I can say for trying to find that sort of thing.
Josh, you got any questions? No, guess not.
All right. Well, if that works for everybody, I think I'll pull up the contact info again. I believe this is going to end up on the Idea Farm Network YouTube. So there'll certainly be some information there, you know, with contact info. If you guys think of something that you're curious about, or if there's anything I can help you with, or, you know, again, I'm no expert in any of this, but I'm sure to enjoy it, and love to help anybody that'd like to start to go down this road. So, you know, my email is pretty easy. It's just my first name at intensivegrazing.com. Yeah, don't be a stranger, you know, feel free to reach out.
All right. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah. Hey, thank you all for tuning in.